Seattle tonight looked as if it were wrapped in glass. Every light from the tall buildings shimmered on the lake's surface, glittering like 1,000 falling stars. On the top floor of Galbraith Tower, where the clouds seemed close enough to touch the windows, Serena Blake stood before a mirror, her hands gently smoothing the deep blue fabric of the gown Ethan had given her during their trip to Napa Valley last summer. The dress hugged her slender frame just enough to trace her soft curves. That midnight blue made her deep brown eyes stand out, the very eyes Ethan once said were where I find peace in a mad world. But tonight, that peaceful gaze hid a secret, a small, fragile one, yet powerful enough to change both of their lives. 2 pink lines, 2 tiny lines on the test she took that morning, making her heart race wildly, as if she had forgotten what a normal rhythm felt like. She was pregnant, not with 1, but 2 babies, twins, the doctor said. Serena had never believed in miracles, but in that moment, she did. She thought life had sent her a gift that love, faith, and fate had all agreed upon. Tonight, she planned to tell Ethan. She had imagined the moment all day. He would smile, hold her, look overwhelmed, and kiss her as if the world held only the two. They would talk about names, a nursery, and the life ahead. She had thought maybe this was the turning point, from 2 people in love to a family. Serena looked out at the city. Seattle drizzled softly, as it always did on February nights. It's raining and never came in torrents, just a gentle fall, enough to blur the streetlights and soften the heart. She loved that feeling, the rain outside, and his warmth within these walls. The door opened. Ethan appeared, still in his white shirt and black slacks, collar slightly undone, a glass of wine in hand. His dark hair was tousled, as it often was after he'd run his fingers through it while working. The way he walked out of his office, weary yet composed, still made Serena's heart tremble, like it had that first night she saw him at the city's Art Foundation gala. "You look different tonight," his low voice teased, carrying a hint of a smile. "How so?" she asked, trying to sound calm though her heart was pounding. "Like you're hiding something from me." Serena laughed softly, stepped closer, took the glass from his hand, and set it down. "Maybe something good." Ethan raised a brow. "Something good, huh? You've got me curious." The soft light from the lamp washed over their shoulders. The elegant penthouse, once a symbol of success, now felt intimate, lived in. Serena loved this place not for its glass walls or designer furniture, but because every corner held a trace of them, the long nights together, the mornings with coffee, the quiet dawns they had watched side by side. And now, she was ready for a new chapter, the one that began with "We're having a baby." Ethan sank into the sofa, poured another glass, and stayed silent for a few seconds, the silence that meant something was coming. "Serena," he began, his tone gentle but serious, "I need to tell you something before things go any further." Her brow furrowed. "What is it?" "I've been thinking a lot about the future." He swirled the wine, staring into its dark red depths as if looking at an unchangeable decision. "About what I want and what I can't have." Serena smiled faintly. She thought maybe he was about to propose, or perhaps he was worried about whether he'd make a good father. She was ready to reassure him. "But no, I never want children, Serena." The words dropped into the room like a silent explosion. She froze, her heart skipped once, then again. "What did you say?" "I know it sounds harsh," Ethan went on, his tone calm, businesslike, "but I need you to understand. I don't want kids. Not now. Not ever. I've seen too many lives ruined by the weight of family." It felt like someone had drawn all the air out of the room. Every sound of rain, every trace of light, every ounce of warmth vanished, leaving only his voice, cold and final. She gripped the hem of her dress, steadying herself. "Ethan, you're just talking hypothetically. What if? What if having a child didn't change your love for me?" "I don't want to find out, Serena." His tone hardened. "I know who I am. I would never be a good father. Kids would destroy the life I've built." That last sentence cut deep. What if she tried, her voice trembling? "If there's already a child in this story?" Ethan looked up, his eyes sharp. "Then that person would have to choose. Me or them." Silence. There was nothing left to say. Serena felt her chest tighten. Her hand drifted to her stomach where two tiny hearts were already beating. He had already chosen. He didn't know it, but his words had decided everything. She smiled faintly, a lost, quiet smile. "Thank you for being honest, Ethan. I knew you'd understand," he said, taking her hand, believing he had shared something profound. But Serena heard nothing more. In her mind, only the rain tapping against the glass, steady, cold, and distant. She left the apartment at 11:47. No tears, no screams, no collapse, only a chilling silence. The long hallway of Galbraith Tower echoed with the sound of her heels and her heartbeat, slow and heavy. The elevator doors closed, reflecting a woman in a deep blue gown, lips trembling, one hand resting protectively on her belly. She carried only her phone and wallet, and the two lives growing inside her. When the elevator reached the lobby, Serena stepped out without looking back. No goodbye, no message. She left behind the man she once believed would walk with her through life. That night, Seattle was colder than ever. The rain fell like shards of glass on the streets. Serena sat in her old car, hands shaking as she turned the key. She switched on the heater, watching the tower fade in the rearview mirror. The light from the top floor their home was still on. Ethan was probably there, reading reports or sipping wine, unaware that just a few floors below, the woman he loved was driving away, carrying their future with her. Serena bit her lip, tasting the salt of her tears. "We'll be okay," she whispered, hand resting on her belly. "I promise." She drove south, toward Oregon, away from the city lights, away from the pain. The night was deep, the roads slick, and the sea wind crept through the car windows. At one point, she had to pull over, hazard lights flashing, her body shaking with silent sobs from fear, from grief, from love. But when she looked down at her hands on her stomach, she felt something else. Strength. She remembered the doctor's smile. Twins. Congratulations. 2 babies. 2 miracles. And Serena Blake, once fragile, once broken, became a mother. She could endure anything, as long as her children were safe. By dawn, her car turned onto a small coastal road, leading to Willowbrook, a seaside town she had once passed through on a teaching trip years ago. The sky had just begun to lighten. The rain stopped, and pale silver clouds drifted slowly across the soft lavender dawn. Willowbrook greeted her with the scent of salt, distant waves, and a peace Seattle had never given her. Serena stopped in front of a small cottage, a weathered "For Rent" sign hanging on the white fence. She called the number on the sign, trembling. "I need a place to rent starting today." The voice on the other end, warm and kind, belonged to Phoebe Whitmore. "Welcome to Willowbrook, dear. We always have room for someone ready to start over," and that was where everything truly began again. Serena moved into the little yellow cottage with windows facing the sea. In the corner, she placed an old frame Ethan had once given her face down, unable to look. She wrote in her journal, "The first day of our new life. I will live for you both." The following month, she had her first checkup at the town's small clinic. The elderly doctor greeted her with a gentle smile. She heard her baby's faint, rhythmic, beautiful heartbeats through the ultrasound, a song of salvation. Serena wept, not from pain this time, but from knowing she still had a reason to go on. She gave birth to Julian and Luke on a spring morning, when cherry blossoms filled Willowbrook's narrow streets. Phoebe was the first to hold them, smiling. "They look like you, but whose eyes are those?" Serena only smiled, gazing at their clear blue eyes. "They belong to someone I once loved." In the quiet cottage, Serena sat beside their crib that night, humming softly. Outside, the waves murmured. 2 fresh birth certificates on the table lay still warm from the printer. The line for father was blank, but the line for mother was written in steady, sure strokes. Serena Blake. She leaned down and kissed her sons' foreheads. "I promise, no matter what happens, you'll grow up surrounded by love, not someone else's mine." The soft glow of the lamp lit her tired yet peaceful face. Outside, the sea breeze whispered like a blessing, and from that moment on, the woman who had once been broken began the journey of a mother, long, uncertain, but full of hope. The morning after the night she left, Seattle was wrapped in a thin layer of fog. The skyscrapers looked as if they were drifting among clouds. Serena Blake drove through that fog, carrying 3 small suitcases, a water bottle, a few boxes of snacks, and 2 tiny lives growing inside her. Her old silver car, smelling faintly of plastic and gasoline, rattled with every curve of the I-5 highway. Outside, rows of rain-soaked trees blurred past under a fine, powdery drizzle. Behind her, Seattle faded, its lights shrinking to distant sparks. Serena didn't cry anymore. Perhaps her tears had already run dry. What remained was an unfamiliar emptiness, as if someone had taken a piece of her heart. Yet her hand still rested on her belly, where she knew 2 hearts were still beating. She was not alone. The radio played softly an old song, Fields of Gold by Sting. The melody brought back memories of her early days with Ethan. They had once danced in the living room when that song came on by chance. He had held her close and said, "If one day I disappear, just play this song and you'll know I'm still somewhere near you." That line now felt painfully ironic. The wind picked up. The road south toward Oregon narrowed, flanked by pine forests and low ridges. Occasionally, a seagull glided across the gray sky, as if guiding a lost traveler. Serena stopped at a small rest area near the state border and bought hot coffee and a few pastries. Sitting in the car, she watched heavy trucks pass, their engines blending with the rain into a somber, wordless symphony. In the steaming cup, her reflection appeared pale, tired, yet her eyes still clear. She whispered, as if speaking to the 2 babies within her, "We're going to start over, somewhere. No one knows us, just the 3 of us. I'll work, raise you, and never let anyone hurt us again." It wasn't a promise, it was a vow. By 9 in the morning, Serena turned off the highway, heading west toward Willowbrook, a small coastal town she'd visited 2 years earlier on an art teaching trip. She remembered telling Ethan then, "That town smells like sea salt and wild roses." "I loved it." He had only smiled. "You belong in the city, Serena. You were born to shine." Maybe he was right, but she didn't need to shine today. She just needed peace. By noon, the fog began to lift, and weak sunlight spilled over the winding road to Willowbrook. The ocean appeared in the distance, silver waves crashing against dark rocks, seagulls calling overhead. The Oregon coast wasn't loud like California's. It was lonely, still much like her heart. When the sign "Welcome to Willowbrook" appeared, Serena laughed softly, her first smile in days. Beneath the sign, a handwritten line read, "A place to breathe again." Yes, she thought, she needed to breathe again. The little town smelled of coffee and freshly baked bread. Pastel-colored houses lined the streets, window boxes spilling flowers, a grocery store, a post office, a flower shop, and a small cafe called the Lighthouse Cafe. Serena slowed down, stopping in front of a small yellow cottage. On its white fence hung a weathered sign, "For rent. Contact Phoebe Whitmore." She took out her phone and dialed the number. A woman's voice, warm, low, and kind, answered, "Hello? Hi. I saw the rental sign outside. Is the place still available?" "Oh, it is, dear. How long do you plan to stay?" "For quite a while, if possible." "Good. I'm Phoebe. I live next door. I can show you the place right now as long as you don't mind a bit of fresh paint and a few cats that like to visit." Her voice made Serena smile, a strange warmth rising inside her. 20 minutes later, Phoebe, a brown-haired woman in her 40s, glasses perched on her nose, a hand-embroidered sweater on her shoulders, greeted her with a knowing look. "You look like someone who's just come through a storm," Phoebe said, squinting. Serena smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." The house was cozy, 2 bedrooms, a small living room facing the sea, and a wooden porch where you could hear the waves at night. Phoebe opened the window, letting in the breeze full of salt and dried grass. "If you're trying to start over," she said, "Willowbrook's the best place. We don't ask too many questions here. Everyone's left something behind." Serena nodded. She didn't need to say more. That afternoon, she signed the lease, took the keys, and unloaded her car, 3 suitcases, a box of paints, a few picture frames, and the beginnings of a new life. Before dark, she stepped onto the porch and watched the sea. The sunset cast gold across the roof tiles. She pulled out the old pregnancy test from her pocket stared at it for a long moment, then dropped it into the trash. The past had been long enough. Tomorrow, there would only be the present and the two lives growing inside her. That night, Serena wrote in her journal, "The first day in Willowbrook. No Ethan, no Seattle. Only me, Julian, and Luke, two little hearts learning to beat in a new world." Life slowed down in the seaside town. Mornings brought sunlight through the curtains, shimmering on a steaming cup of tea. Afternoons filled with the sound of waves and children playing on the beach. Evenings carried the scent of salt through the cottage, where Serena began painting again. Her belly grew, week by week, month by month. She worked at Phoebe's flower shop, helping arrange bouquets and sometimes painting minor chalkboard signs. The townsfolk grew used to the sight of the brown-haired woman with the gentle smile and swelling belly, sketchbook always in hand, as she strolled along the shore. "Did you come here alone?" someone once asked. Serena smiled. "Not exactly. I've got two companions." She started teaching a small art class at Willowbrook Elementary in her final months. The children were sweet and lively. When she drew sailboats on the board and heard their laughter, she felt the world had forgiven her. Sometimes she dreamed of Ethan, always in his white shirt, walking through the fog, asking, "Are you all right?" She always answered, "I am." Then she'd wake in the night, hand resting on her belly, feeling the tiny kicks. Yes, she truly was. One March morning, the first contraction came. Rain fell outside, and the sea roared. Phoebe rushed her to the small-town hospital. White walls, the smell of antiseptic, the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. After 7 long hours, 2 cries filled the room at once. Twin boys are healthy, though one is slightly smaller. Serena laughed and cried at the same time. Dr. Martinez gently placed the babies in her arms. "Congratulations, Miss Blake. 2 beautiful boys." She looked down 2 tiny faces, eyes shut, hands gripping each other, as if afraid to let go. "Julian," she whispered, kissing the older one's forehead. "And Lucas." She looked up at Phoebe, smiling through tears. "Strong names, right?" Phoebe chuckled. "Just like their mother." The next day, sunlight flooded the little house as Serena sat by the window, cradling her sons. Outside, the sea sparkled, the wind carrying the scent of wild roses. "Welcome to the world, my boys," she whispered, trembling. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a whole family, but I promise we'll be okay." From then on, Serena's life revolved around her children. At night, she hummed them to sleep. In the mornings, she painted while they napped. Sometimes she cried as she painted, not from sadness but quiet joy. Every smile, every cry from her sons rekindled a part of her heart once broken. When Julian laughed for the first time, she said, "You look just like your father." When Luke grasped her finger tightly, she wept softly. "Thank you for staying, my loves." Each night, before bed, she wrote in her journal, "Day 132 of being a mother. Julian loves the lights. Luke loves pulling my hair. They both remind me that love needs no conditions." Summer came, grass filled the garden, and Phoebe helped her build a new wooden fence. Neighbors often stopped by with pies, milk, and warm wishes. Everyone adored the young mother with her twin boys. No one asked about their father. Perhaps in Willowbrook, people understood sometimes. Silence is the kindest way to let someone begin again. Years passed, and Serena grew into her life as a single mother. She didn't age much, but her eyes had changed deeper, calmer. The wounds of the past had faded to faint scars. She opened her window to the sea breeze each morning, watching her 2 boys run across the yard, laughing. Julian built towers from stones. Luke threw shells into the sand. They were always together, always holding hands. Serena stood on the porch, the wind playing with her hair, sunlight warm on her face. She thought, if life stopped here, it might just be enough. She didn't know that, hundreds of miles away, a man sat awake, night after night by a Seattle window, staring into the dark, whispering, where did she go? But in Willowbrook, Serena Blake was no longer the woman left behind in the rain. She was a mother, and she was alive. 5 years is a long time, long enough for a city to change, for a company to expand, for a person to become someone new. But for Ethan Galbraith, Those 5 years were nothing more than a loop of identical days, waking up alone, working endlessly, and coming home to silence. Seattle remained the same grey skies, steady rain, neon lights reflected on wet streets. But to Ethan, it no longer looked beautiful. Perhaps because the person who once made this city feel alive had vanished. Every morning, he rose early, made coffee, opened his laptop, and stared out his high-rise apartment window. Below him, people hurried through their routines, cars sped by, and the familiar hum of a thriving city pulsed on. Yet inside was a hollow space no contract or success could ever fill. She was gone, no note, no trace. The first day after Serena left, he thought she was just angry that she'd return. The second day, he called. Her phone was off. The third, he went to her apartment empty. The fourth, he hired someone to find her. The fifth, he finally understood. She had truly left his life. In that first month, Ethan told himself it was her choice. She needed time, space, distance. He respected that. He didn't realize some kinds of distance aren't meant for coming back, but for surviving. He often looked at the wine glass she'd used at night still sitting on the table. He never put it away. Maybe it was his way of punishing himself. He remained Ethan Galbraith at work, sharp, unshakable, the CEO everyone admired. But those who saw him after dark would have found another man quiet, hollow, and lost. Once, his assistant asked gently, "Sir, would you like me to redecorate the apartment? It's been 5 years, everything's still the same." Ethan just shook his head. "No, don't touch anything." Even the painting Serena had made of him was still hung on the wall, soft brushstrokes, thoughtful eyes, and a faint smile he no longer had. He remembered the night she gave it to him. She said, "I want to keep you as I see you, because out there, the world will make you forget who you used to be." He had only laughed back then. Now he understood she had seen what he hadn't, that he was slowly losing himself. The months that followed, Ethan threw himself into work with a kind of fury. He opened new branches, invested millions, and acquired startups. The media praised him as the model of cold, flawless, modern success. No one knew that each night he came home, stared at the skyline, and whispered, "Where are you, Serena?" He tried dating again, successful, beautiful women who laughed and drank with him. But none made him want to stay after dinner. None looked at him with that same gentleness. None made him feel like he was enough. One night, after sending a woman home, Ethan stood by the window, listening to the rain. Only a few drops remained in the wine glass, and he saw his reflection solitary, hollow, adrift. "I don't want children," he had once said. Now the words echoed like a curse. He wondered if Serena would have still walked away, if he had stayed silent a little longer that night and listened instead of insisting. Would Serena have still walked away? That question followed him for 5 years. 3 years after she disappeared, Ethan sat in a board meeting, listening to talk of profits, shares, and expansion, but his mind wasn't there. Outside, the rain fell. He remembered that rainy night, her standing there, eyes wet, hand resting lightly on her stomach. The image flickered by, and a thought struck him, sharp and breathless. Had she taken something with her when she left? The thought made his chest tighten. From that day on, he began to search for her in earnest. He hired private investigators, tracked every card transaction, every rental, every old number. But Serena Blake had vanished, as if she'd never existed. No trace, no accounts, no fixed address. "She may have left the state," the investigator suggested. "No," Ethan replied. "She wouldn't leave the coast." He remembered her saying once, "If I ever start over, it'll be somewhere near the sea." So he drove the western coastline from San Francisco to Astoria. In every small town, every cafe, every seaside market, he stopped and asked strangers, "Have you seen a woman, brown hair, brown eyes, about 30, an artist?" Everyone shook their heads. Each time disappointment hit, he returned to Seattle and buried himself deeper in work. But inside, something was rotting slowly. Ethan still made 2 cups of tea every night, one for himself and one for her. The second always went untouched, cooling like time over a scar. Sometimes he asked himself, Has she forgotten me? Then answered, probably, and she should. But when fog misted the glass on autumn mornings, he would see her again in memory, the girl in the grey robe, holding a paintbrush, golden light touching her hair. Ethan, stop working. Sit with me. Her voice echoed in his mind, soft as breath. He'd close his eyes, and in those rare moments, he wished he could return just once. By the 4th year, his company was worth billions. He stood on stage, accepting the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Flashbulbs burst, applause thundered. A reporter asked, "Mr. Galbraith, what do you think about your success?" He smiled faintly. "I think a person only truly succeeds when they know who they're doing it for." No one understood his answer, but he did. Back home, he opened a drawer and took an old photograph. Serena smiling, eyes squinting in the Sunday. The edges were worn, but her smile still ached in his chest. He no longer blamed her, nor excused himself. He regretted, not that she left, but he hadn't said, "I need you," when she was still there. One winter night, Ethan drove out of the city. No destination. Each gust of wind seemed to carry her laughter, and he followed wherever it led. He passed small coastal towns, wooden cottages, and walls covered in bougainvillea. Every place looked the same, peaceful, simple, happy. He wondered if she was living somewhere like this, with someone else, perhaps having forgotten him. But even thinking that, he kept searching. Not because he hoped to find her, but because he couldn't not search. Sometimes regret is the only way love keeps breathing. By the 5th year, Ethan had begun to change. He stopped talking so much about profits and markets. He started visiting art centers and funding children's art programs. One day, walking through a small gallery in Portland, he stopped before a painting the Oregon coast at sunset, a woman's silhouette facing the waves. Signed only, S.B. His heart pounded. He asked the gallery owner, "Who painted this?" She mailed it in, no return address. Just a note saying, "I only want to contribute something small to the exhibition." Ethan touched the canvas, tracing the soft, tender strokes that carried light and sorrow. He knew, no one had to tell him. She was still out there. From that day on, Ethan drove to coastal towns every weekend. Astoria, Newport, Cannon Beach, Florence searching. He stopped at every market, every cafe, every tiny art shop. Once, in a seaside cafe, he saw a sketch on the wall, 2 laughing twin boys playing by the water. Below it are the words, "For J and L." He froze, his fingers trembling as he touched the frame. "Who drew this?" he asked the owner. "She's called Serena, I think. Lives somewhere near Willowbrook." The name stopped his world. His heart pounded like the first time he'd met her. 5 years of sleepless nights, endless drives, and unanswered questions suddenly pointed in one direction. Ethan drove through the night. When dawn broke over the Oregon coast, he stopped his car before a small sign. Willowbrook, 3 miles. He turned off the engine and sat still, hands gripping the wheel. At that moment, he didn't know what awaited him, forgiveness or a closed door. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't let her slip away this time. Above the grey horizon, thin beams of sunlight pierced through the clouds, falling over the sea like threads of gold. Ethan looked toward them, toward where he believed she was, and whispered, "Serena, I'm coming." Willowbrook, springtime. Like a postcard resting on the edge of the Pacific, the small seaside town was bathed that morning in soft sunlight, golden, warm, and scented with wildflowers. Waves broke gently against the shore, and the wind carried the aroma of coffee through rows of pastel-painted cottages. At the corner of Maple Street, the Lighthouse Cafe, the earliest to open in town, greeted the day. The paint on its wooden sign had long since faded, but the smell of fresh pastries and brewing coffee still stopped passers-by. After driving through the night without rest, Ethan Galbraith stopped in front of the cafe. He hadn't eaten since the evening before. His head ached with fatigue, yet his heart felt clearer than it had in years. The ocean here wasn't like Seattle's, not cold, not heavy, just calm, breathing softly. He looked around, small wooden houses, open windows, children running across the street, townsfolk smiling as they passed one another. The peace was so complete that it made him feel out of place. Ethan parked along the curb and stepped inside. The doorbell chimed softly. A young blonde waitress greeted him brightly. "Good morning. What can I get you?" "Black coffee. To go," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Of course. It might be a few minutes, it's busy today." He nodded, choosing a seat by the window. From there, he could see the small park across the street, a playground, a few swings, a patch of green grass. Sunlight filtered through the trees, scattering glimmers across the ground. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to steady his breath. His heart had been racing all night like a boy's. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. If he found her, what would he say? "I'm sorry? I've missed you." Or maybe, "Thank you for surviving." He didn't know. He only knew that if he truly saw her again, he wouldn't let her disappear this time. Bright, pure, heartbreakingly familiar laugh cut through the air. Ethan's eyes opened. Outside, in the small garden by the park, a woman knelt beside two little boys, showing them how to draw with colored chalk on the pavement. The wind caught her brown hair, lifting it gently. She wore a white t-shirt, jeans, and a smile he hadn't seen in 1,826 days. Serena Blake. The world stopped. No sound, no clinking cups, no murmurs, only the pounding of his heart, loud and breaking. He rose, stepping closer to the window, afraid to blink. It was her. It was really her. But what rooted him in place wasn't just Serena. It was the two boys beside her, one with dark hair and bright features, carefully coloring a rainbow. The other, lighter-haired, laughing, hands dusted with chalk. When they laughed, their eyes flashed a clear blue, the color of the sea, the color of his eyes. Ethan felt his whole body go cold. The world tilted. He wanted to run, speak, and breathe, but his legs refused to move. Only his heart thudded, hard and uneven. Serena hadn't seen him. She smiled, brushed chalk from one boy's hair, said something softly, and looked out toward the sea. The scene was so achingly beautiful, like the painting he'd seen in the Portland Gallery, the one signed S.B. A tear slipped down his cheek. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Maybe it was the night she left. Or maybe he had never really stopped. He had just done it silently, all these years. When Serena finally turned, the sunlight caught her face, lighting her soft brown eyes, which he had missed until it hurt to breathe. For a single heartbeat, she looked toward the cafe, and their eyes met. Just one glance, but it shattered in 5 years. Serena froze. Her hand trembled. The chalk fell from her fingers. She thought her mind was playing tricks. She blinked, then opened her eyes again. No, it was him, Ethan, the man she had once loved, lost, and sworn never to find again. He stood there in the sunlight, in a white shirt, his face thinner, but his eyes, those same deep, weary eyes, still held that familiar ache and tenderness. Neither spoke. The sea wind carried through the quiet between them, waves breaking softly, hearts beating in the same stunned rhythm as if time had folded back on itself. Serena bent down, pretending to pick up the chalk box, hiding her tear-brimmed eyes. She knew she should walk away. She should take her boys and leave as she had 5 years ago. But her legs wouldn't move. Ethan stepped out of the cafe. He didn't remember if he paid. He only knew the doorbell chimed behind him, and the crash of the waves hit him straight in the chest. He crossed the small street, one step at a time through children's laughter and fragile sunlight. When he stopped in front of her, Serena finally looked up. They stood there for a long moment. No words, anger, or excuses. Only two people who had once belonged to each other, now meeting on an ordinary morning, with 5 silent years between them. Serena. His voice was rough, trembling almost a prayer. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. In her eyes, he saw pain, but also something else, peace. He wanted to say, "I've missed you," but the words died on his tongue when he looked down at the two boys. They were crouched beside her, gazing curiously at the tall stranger who had appeared. The lighter-haired one tilted his head. "Mister, why do your eyes look like ours?" Serena froze. The world stopped breathing. Ethan knelt, his hands trembling, eyes wide with something between awe and sorrow. She quickly took her son's hands, her voice shaking. "Julian, Luke, go inside, sweethearts." "But, Mom, now, please." The boys nodded obediently, running toward the back garden, still looking over their shoulders. Ethan's gaze followed them, every gesture cutting deeper their smiles, steps, and eyes. He didn't need to ask, he already knew. He drew a breath, steadying himself. "Serena, are they?" "It's not your business anymore," she interrupted, her voice cool but trembling. "I just want, don't." She turned away. "Ethan, don't break what I've spent 5 years rebuilding." He stood still, at a loss for words. The ocean wind blew, carrying salt and the cry of gulls. His voice softened to a whisper. "I've looked for you for 5 years, Serena. I've driven through every town, seen so many faces that almost looked like you, but none of them were you." She turned back, eyes red. "And for what, Ethan? To say sorry? To tell me you were wrong? I know you were. But sorry doesn't rewrite the past. It doesn't erase the night you said you'd never want children." He couldn't answer. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the waves and distant laughter of the boys. After a long pause, Serena sighed, her voice softening. "I don't hate you anymore, truly. But I have my life now. Those 2 boys, they're my whole world." She looked at him then, sorrow flickering across her face. "Please, Ethan, don't come here. Please don't confuse them. I don't want them growing up wondering why their father once didn't want them." Ethan closed his eyes. Pain filled his chest like tidewater. He said nothing. He nodded slightly, accepting, like a man taking the verdict he knew he deserved. Serena turned, lifting Luke into her arms while Julian ran beside her, shoes dusty with sand. She didn't look back, but tears slid down her cheeks one after another. Ethan watched silently, eyes wet but calm, until the 3 disappeared behind the wildflowers fence. He sat down on the nearby bench, head bowed. Everything inside him felt shattered, yet beneath the ache was a fragile light. He had found her. She was alive. She was happy. And he had 2 sons. The sun climbed higher. The sea kept breathing. Ethan looked toward the path where she had gone and murmured, "I won't leave again, Serena. Whether you forgive me or not, I'll stay here close to the 3 people I should never have lost." That afternoon, Willowbrook held its breath. The sun leaned westward, gilding rooftops and wild roses along the porch with soft gold. From the small garden at the end of Maple Street came the sound of children's laughter, mingling with the distant rush of the sea. Serena Blake was watering a bed of white daisies. Her brown hair was tousled, her cheeks still dusted with the chalk the boys had played with. Julian and Luke ran around the fence, waving the paper airplanes their mother had just folded. That simple, peaceful scene had been her entire world for 5 years. But today, something in the air was different. The wind seemed to pause, the sunlight slowed, and deep in her chest a strange certainty grew. Something was coming, something she couldn't stop. A voice spoke behind her, low and achingly familiar. "You still love planting daisies, huh?" Serena turned sharply. Ethan stood by the gate, framed in the evening light, holding a small bouquet of lavender, the flowers she had once loved. He was thinner now, his face more lined, his eyes deep and weary, as if he had crossed a lifetime to reach this place. She froze, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice rough. "I know. But I couldn't stay away." She drew a slow breath, steadying herself. "Ethan, you no longer have the right to walk into my life. I'm not here to ruin it," he said quietly. "I just need to talk to you. Once." Serena looked at him for a long moment. Sunlight filtered through the trees, touching his face, and in that instant, she realized that though 5 years had passed, his eyes were still the same. Only now, something inside them had broken. She turned away, leaving him standing by the gate. "Then say what you came to say." Ethan stepped slowly into the garden. His eyes wandered over the small, scattered things, painted stones, childish drawings, tiny shoes left on the porch. He smiled faintly, bittersweet. "They're beautiful. Don't talk about them," she said quickly. He fell silent. Then softly, "I know they're mine." Serena stiffened, her hands tightening on the watering can. "You don't know anything." "I do. I saw them. Their eyes, smiles, and how Julian furrows his brow when he concentrates. It's me. Down to every movement. She turned, tears welling. Ethan, don't. Please don't do this to me. You have no right to even say their names. He took a step closer, his voice trembling. Serena, I didn't come to take anything back. I came to say I'm sorry for not being brave enough to keep you when I should have. For 5 years I've been searching not to undo the past, but because I couldn't live another day without knowing if you were still alive, if you were okay. Her eyes shimmered. I'm okay, Ethan. Better than you think. Because I learned that sometimes love doesn't have to walk the same road to be real. He bowed his head, his tone low. I know. But if you'll let me, I want to stand here, even if it's only in some small corner of the life you built for the 3 people I love most. She gave a soft, pained laugh. You love them? The children you once said you'd never want? The question silenced him. After a long pause, he spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I said the most foolish thing of my life that night. I thought I didn't need anyone, no family, no children. But when you left, I realized the only thing that ever gave life meaning was what I'd thrown away. He looked up, straight into her eyes. Serena, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I want to see them sometimes. I won't interfere. I won't disrupt anything. I want to know they're happy. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She turned away, covering her mouth. But it was too late. From inside the house came 2 small voices. Mama, who's out there? Serena spun around quickly, wiping her face. No one, sweetheart. Go back inside. But the boys had already come running out. Julian, serious as always, froze when he saw the stranger. Luke, bold and bright, stepped closer, his blue eyes wide. Who are you? He asked. Ethan knelt, managing a shaky smile. I'm a friend of your mum's. A friend? But why are you looking at us like that? His throat tightened. Because you're the most beautiful boys I've ever seen. Julian frowned, skeptical. Your eyes, they look like mine. Serena started to stop him, but Luke burst out, laughing. Yeah, Julian, he's got our eyes. The boys giggled innocent, unaware while the grown-ups stood frozen. A father struggling to breathe, a mother trying not to break. At last, Serena let go, her voice trembling. Ethan, yes, they're your sons. The air went still. Ethan stared at her, his eyes glistening. His lips moved, but no sound came. He stepped forward, hand trembling, wanting to reach for them, but he didn't. He couldn't. He only bowed his head, and a tear fell onto the white daisies at his feet. The afternoon melted into dusk. Serena led the boys back inside, but Luke turned once, waving. Bye, mister. Ethan's voice shook. Goodbye, Luke. The door closed, leaving him alone in the garden. The wind carried the faint scent of lavender and the sea's low murmur. He sat down on the porch step. Looking around, she touched everything here. The half-painted chair, the little potted plants, the children's drawings. He brushed a hand over the fence and whispered, smiling faintly, You did well, Serena. Inside, Serena leaned against the wall, both hands over her face. Mama, are you crying? Julian asked softly. She shook her head, forcing a smile. No, darling. I'm just a little tired. Luke tilted his head. Who was that man, Mama? Serena sat down, pulling them close. Someone your mother once loved. Very much. The words broke her own voice. That night, when the boys were asleep, Serena sat alone by the window. The streetlight cast a pale gold glow over the garden. She saw Ethan standing quietly, eyes fixed on the house. Part of her wanted to go out, to say something. Another part, the part that had once shattered, was still afraid. She remembered that rainy night in Seattle, the cold words, the closing door. The pain had built a wall inside her. And now, his gaze was slowly cracking it. The wind stirred, and she heard his voice, soft but clear, Thank you, for giving them life. She froze. Tears fell again, but they weren't bitter. They were warm this time. When she opened the door the next morning, Ethan was still sitting on the step with a cold cup of coffee. You didn't leave? She asked quietly. He looked up, smiling faintly. I don't want to disappear again, Serena. Not when you and the boys are this close. She studied him in silence. I know you don't trust me, he said. You have every reason not to. But if you'll let me, I'd like to see them sometimes. Not as anything official, just as a friend. Serena looked deep into his eyes. Gone was the pride, the cold certainty. She saw honesty now, and a man learning how to love again. Ethan, I don't know if I can ever forget, she whispered. I'm not asking you to. I want you to believe this time. I'll stay, even if it's only outside the gate. She didn't answer. She turned away, but her heart wasn't as cold as before, and she left the gate open. That afternoon, while Julian and Luke played in the garden, Ethan sat on the other side of the fence, telling stories about ships, dolphins, and the night sky. The boys laughed, and sometimes, from the kitchen window, Serena watched her heart aching, but no longer in pain. 5 years of solitude, of sleepless nights, of silent strength were slowly being soothed, piece by piece, not by promises, but by his quiet presence. When night came and Ethan said goodbye, Luke ran up and hugged his leg. Come back tomorrow. Ethan knelt, ruffling his hair. If your mum says yes. Both boys turned to look at her. Serena stood in the doorway, the light glinting off her soft brown hair. A moment of stillness, then she nodded. Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile in 5 years. As he walked away, Serena watched him go, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt in so long. Not forgiveness, not yet. Love, but faith, the kind she thought she had lost forever. The sea breeze carried the mingled scent of daisies and lavender. Above, the moon hung thin as a thread over the little garden where the past, the present, and hope finally met. Summer in Willowbrook always came slowly. Mornings still wore a veil of mist over the shore. The wind carried the taste of salt, and the sun rose lazily through drifting clouds. Serena woke early, as always, brewed coffee, opened the windows for sunlight to pour in, and listened to her children's waves and laughter in the yard. But that morning, something was different. Alongside the familiar voices of Julian and Luke came another low, patient, a little clumsy. No, Luke, you can't stack those rocks that way. They'll fall. I can do it. Daddy, look, Daddy. The word froze Serena mid-step in the kitchen. She turned toward the window. Ethan was crouched in the garden, a flat stone in his hand, helping the boys build a fortress from beach rocks. Sunlight played on his dark hair, and his face, tanned and softer now, no longer bore the sharpness of the businessman she had once known. He laughed awkwardly as Luke's tower collapsed onto his shoes. The sight made her heart tighten. She didn't know when the boys had started calling him Daddy. Maybe a few days ago, after he told them a bedtime story about a man who spent years searching for the 2 stars he'd lost. And perhaps, in their innocent way, they understood. She stood there with her cup of coffee, watching in silence. Ethan's laugh rang out again, warm and deep. Luke, you destroyed the greatest engineering feat in Willowbrook history. That's okay, Daddy. Let's build it again. Sitting beside them, Julian was stacking stones carefully, quiet, deliberate, precisely the way Ethan used to arrange plans in his office. You need a strong base, or it won't stand, Julian said. Ethan smiled. You're right, son. Not just towers, everything in life. Serena heard that, and something in her chest caught. When she stepped onto the porch, Ethan looked up and met her eyes. Good morning, he said softly, as if afraid to disturb the calm. You're here early, she replied, steadying her voice. I promised the boys I'd help with their stone city. Couldn't break that promise. She smiled faintly. I didn't know you kept promises. They both fell silent. The air between them was no longer heavy. It had changed. Distance remained, but not the wall. Ethan glanced at the boys laughing in the sun, then back at her. I never thought I'd find happiness just by getting my hands dirty with sand and paint. Maybe you're learning to live again, Serena said softly. Maybe, he smiled. But I don't want to learn alone anymore. Her breath caught, but she said nothing. He bent back to help Julian rebuild the tower, and she watched from the steps, torn between fear, tenderness, and something else she couldn't yet name. From that day on, Ethan came almost every morning. No longer outside the fence but in the yard, drawing with the boys, kicking a ball, sometimes cooking dinner. He learned to crack eggs, wash vegetables, and wipe the table, things he'd never done before. But he did them like a humble student. Julian and Luke became his little teachers. "Daddy, wash your hands before baking cookies." "He dropped an egg, Mama." "It's okay," Serena said, laughing. "Just another small lesson." One afternoon, the three of them sat eating ice cream on the steps. Serena watched them, the golden light, the sound of laughter, and realized the house had never felt so full. At night, Ethan read them stories. His voice was deep and steady. When he finished, Luke rested his head on Ethan's shoulder, already asleep. Julian stayed awake a moment longer and whispered, "Daddy, where were you before? Why did you come so late?" Ethan froze, stroking his hair. "Daddy got lost," he said softly, "but Daddy found his way home now." Julian smiled sleepily, his gentle eyes so much like Serena's. "Don't go again, okay? I promise," Ethan whispered. That night, Serena stood in the doorway, the boys asleep on Ethan's shoulders, his eyes closed, peace softening his face. Her eyes stung. She hadn't expected that the man who once broke her would someday be the one to make her feel safe again. The days settled into a new rhythm. Ethan rented a small house near the beach, just a few streets away. Each morning, he came to help take the boys to school. Each afternoon, he brought them home. No one asked him to. He didn't make grand promises. He showed up. Soon, the townspeople grew used to seeing the tall man in rolled-up sleeves walking along the shore with the twins. They called him the father from the Blake house. Ethan never corrected them, he only smiled. He began attending Serena's art classes at the local school, sitting quietly in the back, watching her paint. When she told her students, "Art is how we hold on to what we're afraid to lose," he smiled faintly, knowing precisely what she meant. Evenings became theirs, Ethan cooking clumsy dinners, Serena helping the boys with sketches. Once, he burned an entire tray of pies. The boys burst out laughing, and Serena laughed so hard she cried. "I swear I followed the recipe," he protested. "You forgot the sugar," she said, still laughing. "Ah, that explains it. Not sweet like me back then." For a moment, they fell silent. Then Serena replied softly, "That's changed." Ethan looked up. She didn't meet his gaze, only kept slicing the pie, but her tone was tender, true, and for the first time, the ache in his chest was one of joy. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Serena found him sitting on the porch, staring at the sea. In his hands was an old photograph, her smiling in sunlight, taken before everything fell apart. She sat beside him without a word. They listened to the waves and the wind moving through the fence. Ethan spoke quietly. "I used to think love meant having everything. Now I know it just means having a real heart." Serena turned to him. "I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting. But no, it's when you can look back and it doesn't hurt anymore." They sat in silence again, moonlight glinting off 2 teacups. "Serena," he said, "if I can do anything to make it right, I will. Not out of guilt, but because I want our children to grow up, knowing their father learned how to love." She smiled gently. "Ethan, you already have." He looked at her, surprised. "You've loved them," she said softly, "in the simplest, truest way, and that's all you were ever missing." He held her gaze, and no more words were needed. Only the moon, the sea, and 2 people sitting side by side in a peace they had both traveled a lifetime to find. Days passed, and Ethan stayed. When Julian fell ill, he was there through the night. When Luke finished his first painting, Ethan was the first to see it. When they went to the beach, he carried Luke on his shoulders while Serena walked beside him, smiling. One evening, as the sun set, Julian asked, "Daddy, does everyone get to be loved?" Ethan brushed his hair gently. "Yes, son. It just takes some people a long journey to learn how to love the right way." Serena heard that, turned toward him, her eyes soft with quiet emotion. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Ethan has changed. He's no longer the man of decisions and numbers. Now he's the man of morning coffee, bedtime stories, and apologies that need no words. Maybe he's learning to love from the 2 children he once feared to have." By summer's end, the sea grew calm again. Serena and Ethan took the boys camping on the beach at the edge of town. They pitched a tent, lit a fire, and roasted marshmallows. Luke fell asleep in Serena's arms, and Julian leaned against Ethan's shoulder. The moon shone bright. The waves whispered. Ethan said quietly, "I used to think I'd never have this a small family. Laughter, peace. I don't know if I deserve it." Serena cut in gently. "No one has to deserve love, Ethan. You have to want to keep it." He turned to her. She smiled, not with pain this time, but with tenderness. At that moment, Ethan knew he had finally found his way home. September brought autumn to Willowbrook. In the mornings, mist fell like a thin veil over the rooftops and winding streets. Leaves began to turn gold, and the wind carried the first incredible scent of the season. Inside the little house on Maple Street, Serena woke early, made coffee, and listened to Ethan and the boys laughing outside. Since he'd come into their lives, the house had never been quiet again. Laughter, voices, the sound of a man clumsily reading stories aloud, all blending into something she had once feared, then longed for. Now, each morning she found herself thinking, these sounds should have been here all along. Ethan was teaching the boys how to build a blanket fortress. Luke giggled uncontrollably. Julian tied the knots with serious focus, and Ethan fumbled beside them, clearly unfamiliar with the concept of structure. Serena watched through the kitchen window, smiling softly. She realized happiness didn't have to be loud. It only had to be present. Phoebe, her neighbor, stopped by as usual, carrying a basket of muffins and her knowing smile. "Haven't heard your place this noisy in a while," she teased. "Seems that businessman is doing a pretty good job." Serena flushed, laughing. "He's just helping with the boys." "Uh-huh. Helping so well. The whole town's noticed." They both laughed, but Serena, thoughtful, lingered at the door when Phoebe left. She knew Ethan had changed, patient, gentle, steady, but there was still distance between them, a fine mist of fear. Fear that if she trusted again, she might lose everything again. That afternoon, after the boys fell asleep for their nap, Ethan brought out 2 cups of tea and joined her on the porch. "Mint tea," he said, setting the cup down. "You remember I like mint? I remember everything, even the parts I tried to forget." She looked up, and for a moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the wind and the faint tea scent hung in the air. "Ethan," she said quietly, "sometimes I still dream about that night, the things you said, the way you looked at me." He tightened his hold on the cup and nodded. "I dream too," he said, "but it's always after watching you walk away without a word. Do you regret it?" "Not did I," he said, voice low, but still. "Every morning I wake, every time I hear the boys laugh, I think about how I could have been there from the start." Her chest ached. Regret, the words she'd once wanted to hear most, now felt heavier than she expected. "Don't live in regret, Ethan. Live in now with them, and with yourself." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying, but it's hard, when my present always leads back to you." Silence fell again. Serena turned toward the sea, her heart thudding fast. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't running, only afraid of believing again. That evening, the house smelled of sugar and warmth. Ethan and the boys were baking cookies, or trying to. Flour covered the counter, and Ethan's shirt looked like it had been dusted by snow. "Daddy can't cook," Julian sighed. "I'm trying," Ethan protested, grinning. Serena laughed, a full, unguarded laugh she hadn't felt in years. After the boys went to bed, she tidied the kitchen while Ethan washed the dishes. Warm water, soft lamplight, the scent of cookies in the air, quiet, peaceful moments between 2 people who had once been broken. Ethan's voice came softly. "You know, I used to be afraid of kids. I thought they'd take away my freedom. But I feel freer than ever when they call me Daddy." She looked at him, eyes gentle. "You've changed, Ethan. Because of you." "No," she said, shaking her head. "Because of you. I was just the reason you found yourself again." He smiled, not arguing, because deep down, he knew she was both reason and home. As autumn deepened, leaves filled the yard. The sky grew clearer, the sunlight golden. Ethan and the boys raked the leaves, then chased each other around the garden. Serena sat on the porch, sketching a father, 2 children, and peace. When she finished, she titled it Home. the home she once thought she'd never have. That night, Ethan came by and stopped short at the sight of the painting. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's you and the boys," she replied. He stared at it, eyes wet. "I never thought I'd find myself in one of your paintings again. This time, it's real," she said softly. He hesitated, then asked, "Serena, are you still afraid of me?" She thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of losing this piece. I won't destroy it. I'll protect it if you let me." Something inside her trembled. It wasn't a promise, it was truth. And maybe that was why she started to believe again. One evening, as the sun went down, Ethan sat by the fence with an old guitar. "You can play?" Serena asked, surprised. "I've been learning. To sing for the boys." "Really?" "Yeah, but the first song's for you." He strummed a few uncertain chords, his voice rough but warm, imperfect but honest. "If someday you forget, just look toward the sea. I'll be there, still standing, in the wind, in love, in me." When the song ended, Serena turned away, wiping a tear. She said nothing, only pressed a hand over her heart beating wildly, like it once had years ago. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, she found him still on the porch, the chill of the air wrapping around him. She handed him a cup of tea. "Still awake?" "Can't sleep," he smiled faintly. "Maybe because happiness feels so strange." She laughed softly. "Happiness keeps you awake?" "Yeah. I'm afraid it'll disappear by morning." They sat quietly, watching the waves. Then Ethan said, "I won't ask if you've forgiven me, but I want you to know I love you. Still, maybe always." She turned to him, her eyes soft. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, Ethan. It's when you can look back and no longer want to turn away." He looked at her for a long time. Then, without thinking, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. She let it rest in his. The ocean breeze softened. Moonlight shimmered over their joined hands, not tightly held, but enough to show that her heart had begun to open. The next morning, Phoebe stopped by, saw the family laughing together in the garden, and said quietly, "Some wounds only heal through real love." Serena smiled, saying nothing, because in her heart, she already knew the truth. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't running. She wasn't trying to forget. That afternoon, with the wind moving through the garden and Ethan laughing beside their sons, Serena Blake finally forgave. The cold came early that year. Winter crept into Willowbrook sooner than anyone expected. The ocean wind carried the sharp scent of salt and the roar of restless waves. At night, fog blanketed rooftops, and the chill slipped through every crack and window. Serena kept her evening ritual sitting on the porch, wrapped in a thin blanket, listening to Ethan read bedtime stories to the boys in the living room. Everything felt steady, peaceful, but life doesn't always knock before it enters. That night, Luke complained of feeling tired. Usually so full of energy, he went quiet, leaning against Serena's shoulder. "Mama, I feel dizzy," he whispered. Her hand went to his forehead, burning hot. A fever, sudden, fierce. "Ethan," she called. He ran in from the kitchen, worry flashing across his face. "What's wrong?" "Luke's burning up." Ethan touched his son's forehead. "God, he's on fire." Serena rushed for a wet cloth, pressing it against the boy's skin. But the fever didn't break. His breathing quickened, lips dry, cheeks flushed red. Julian stood nearby, frightened. "Mama, is he hurting?" "No, sweetheart," she said softly, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Ethan tried calling Dr. Whitman, the only pediatrician in town, but the line was busy. He grabbed the car keys. "We're taking him to the hospital." Serena nodded, wrapped Luke in a blanket, and followed. Outside, the rain had begun. Wind howled through the trees, raindrops striking hard against the windshield. Ethan drove through the night, hands gripping the wheel. Serena held Luke tightly in the back seat, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. We're almost there." He didn't answer. His breathing came shallow, faint. In the rearview mirror, Ethan caught a glimpse of her pale, terrified, clutching their child. And suddenly he saw another night, years ago, rain falling, Serena walking away, one hand over her stomach. His chest clenched. Not this time. He wouldn't let her face it alone. At the small coastal hospital, a doctor met them at the door. "High fever," he said quickly after a checkup. "Likely viral. We'll start fluids and monitor him closely." Serena stayed by Luke's bedside, never letting go of his hand. Ethan stood behind her, trying to remain composed, though his fists trembled. The only sound was the monitor's soft beeping, steady, merciless. Time moved painfully slowly. Every time Luke stirred, Serena bent over him, whispering, "Mama's here. I'm not going anywhere." Behind her, Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here too." She turned. For the first time in years, she didn't hide her tears. She let them fall. In that sterile white room, they sat side by side, hands intertwined, watching their child fight his small battle against the fever. Ethan whispered hoarsely, "I once said I never wanted children, but now I can't imagine a world without them." Serena's breath hitched. She squeezed his hand. "Don't say anything. Just stay." "I promise." Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, two people who had once broken apart found warmth again in fear, hope, and each other. Dawn came slowly after the longest night. Pale light filtered through the curtains, touching Luke's pale face. His breathing had steadied. Serena had fallen asleep beside the bed, eyes swollen from crying. Ethan sat in a chair, one arm resting gently on her shoulder, silent reassurance. Dr. Whitman entered, checked Luke, and smiled. "He's better. Fever's down. He needs rest." Serena let out a shaky breath. Tears welled again, but this time from relief. She turned to Ethan. He was smiling faintly, exhausted, but calm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," he said. "I'm only doing what I should have done long ago." He tucked the blanket around Luke and kissed his forehead. The boy stirred, opened his eyes, murmured weakly, "Daddy, I knew you'd come." Ethan nearly broke. He took Luke's hand and whispered, "Daddy will always come." Serena watched, her heart swelling. The man who had once shattered her was now holding her world together. In the soft morning light, he was no longer the CEO of Galbraith Tower, just a father, honest and straightforward. The next day, they returned home. Julian ran to his brother and hugged him tight. "You okay now?" Luke grinned weakly. "Yeah, I won." "Won what?" Serena asked. "The fever, of course." Ethan laughed, lifting him high. "That's right, our little warrior won." That evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Serena stepped onto the porch. The wind was cold but clean, carrying the scent of the sea. Ethan stood there, holding a cup of tea, eyes on the horizon. "Were you scared?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "I've never been scared in business, but last night, I was terrified, afraid of losing him, afraid of seeing you hurt like before. You didn't run this time." "No," he said, "and I never will again." She looked at him, her expression soft. "Ethan, I used to think trials came to break us, but maybe they come to show how far we've come." He nodded. "I've changed, Serena." "I know." They stood in silence, gazing at the dark sea. After a moment, he asked, "Do you believe in miracles?" "I didn't before," she said, "but now, maybe I do." He smiled and reached for her hand. "Then you and the boys, you're mine." The next morning, Serena took the children to the beach. The sky was clear, the waves gentle, the wind soft on their faces. Luke ran ahead, laughing. Julian held Ethan's hand. Serena followed behind, eyes glistening. She realized that the fear once gripping her heart was gone, replaced by peace, love, and faith. Ethan turned, calling out, "Serena, come here." She joined them, smiling. He lifted a camera. "Our first photo, all four of us." Click. The moment froze not only in the lens but in their hearts. A family, a beginning. That night, when the house was quiet, Serena opened her journal and wrote, "Last night, I saw a different Ethan. Not the man of logic and control, not the one who feared love. I saw a father who stayed awake all night, a man who held my hand and never let go. Maybe trials don't come to divide us, perhaps they'd come to prove what's real. He's proved it, and I believe." She closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and looked toward the sea. The moonlight shimmered on the water, the wind soft and kind. And in that calm darkness, Serena knew this love, this time, wasn't going anywhere. Winter came quietly to Willowbrook. The wind from the sea carried a sharp chill through the pastel-painted houses, making the curtains flutter as if breathing. Inside Serena's tiny home, warm yellow light glowed against the cold. The air smelled of apple pie and cinnamon. Ethan was in the kitchen with the boys, preparing a surprise breakfast. Julian carefully sliced strawberries, while Luke dumped almost an entire bowl of whipped cream into the mix. "No, Luke, just a little." Ethan laughed, reaching for the spoon, but Luke was faster. "I like cream more than cake." "You're teaching him dangerous habits," Serena teased from the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. The scene was simple, almost unreal. She still couldn't quite believe that the man who once made her cry was now here, laughing in the kitchen she'd once cooked alone for years. But he was here, and he hadn't left. After breakfast, when the boys ran outside, Ethan stayed behind, rinsing his hands in warm water. "Serena," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about the future." She looked at him, smiling faintly. "What kind of plan are you plotting now?" "Not a company plan. A plan for us." His voice was calm, honest, and confident. "I sold most of my shares. I'm leaving Seattle. I want to stay here, with you, with them." Serena froze. "Ethan, are you sure?" "More sure than I've ever been about anything. You've spent half your life building that company." "I know. But that company never held me when I was tired. It never called me Daddy. It never made pancakes with me." He paused, his eyes softening. "You did." Her heart tightened, full of warmth and fear. Ethan dried his hands, stepped closer, and looked into her eyes. "I don't want to be someone who passes through your life anymore, Serena. I want to be the one who stays." Her throat constricted. "Ethan," he smiled gently. "Not today. I just needed you to know." In the following days, he stayed longer, picking the boys up from school, grocery shopping with her, watching movies after they went to bed. Everything fell into place so naturally that it was hard to believe they'd ever been apart. But Serena kept a small distance, not far enough for him to leave, but just enough to protect what she feared losing. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Ethan asked her to walk. The sky was clear, the sea whispering beside them, the air cold enough to keep them close. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't left that night?" he asked. She nodded. "I've thought about it, but I don't regret leaving. If I hadn't, you wouldn't be who you are now." He smiled. "And without you, I wouldn't be here at all." They stopped near an old maple tree, where the wind swept across the sand. Ethan reached into his pocket and took out a small velvet box. "I know you don't like grand gestures," he said softly, "so I'll just say this here where everything began again." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, nothing flashy, just quietly beautiful under the moonlight. "Serena Blake, will you marry me?" She froze. The world around them went silent, only the sound of the waves and their breathing. Ethan said nothing more. His eyes were steady, but there was a tremor beneath his calm, the kind that comes when a man bets his heart on a moment. Serena looked at the ring, then at him. Memories flooded the night in Seattle, the cold apartment, the words that had broken her, the years she'd survived alone, and the day he returned. Her eyes glistened. "Ethan, I don't know. I'm scared." "What are you afraid of?" "Of believing again. Of losing everything just when I've found it." He took a step closer, voice low. "I can't promise life will be perfect, but I promise that if anything falls apart, I'll be the first to hold it together. I'm not leaving again, Serena. Not ever." Her tears slipped free. "Give me time. Please." He nodded. "As long as you need. I'll wait." He closed the box, not disappointed, not sad, just smiling, warm and patient, like the man she had fallen in love with long ago. They walked on, not touching, but closer than ever. Days passed, and neither mentioned the proposal. Ethan stayed, still part of their lives, steady, quiet, present. But Serena knew the little box was still there, tucked away somewhere in his drawer, waiting in silence, like him. One evening, Julian asked, "Mama, why do people get married?" She smiled. Because they want to stay together forever. Then why haven't you and Daddy? She blinked. Who told you that? I saw Daddy's little box, the one from the movies. Ethan, passing by with a glass of water, nearly dropped it. Serena turned toward him. He grinned sheepishly, ruffling Julian's hair. You've got sharp eyes, kid. So when's Mama going to say yes? Luke chimed in. They all laughed, though, for a moment. The laughter trembled with something more profound. A few mornings later, Ethan didn't show up. Serena found a text. Had to go to Seattle for 1 day. Final paperwork. Back soon. Promise. She read it over and over, anxiety tightening her chest. The memories stirred all those times he'd said, "I'm busy," before vanishing into deadlines and silence. But that afternoon, as she poured tea, the door opened. He stood there, coat damp from rain, holding a paper bag. "You're back," she said quietly. "I told you one day. I didn't want you to think I'd broken my word." She exhaled, half laughing. "You really thought I'd doubt you? I'm afraid of anything that might hurt you again. Because once, I did." He placed the bag on the table. Inside was a framed photo, the four smiling on the beach. "I printed it," he said. "So it's not just in your phone." She touched the frame gently. "You're learning how to make me believe, right?" He smiled. "One step at a time." That night, rain returned, soft but steady. The boys went to bed early. Serena sat on the porch, watching droplets dance on the white fence. Ethan brought 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Rain always reminds me of the night you left," he said. "Me too," she replied. "But tonight feels different." They sat quietly, the rain whispering around them. Then Ethan asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "If tomorrow everything changed again, would you regret forgiving me?" She shook her head slowly. "No, because forgiveness wasn't for you, Ethan, but for me." He looked at her, that look, full of warmth and gratitude. He started to speak, but she placed her hand gently over his. "Ethan." "Yeah? What if I said yes? Would you finally stop worrying?" He froze, heart hammering. "What did you just say?" She smiled through tears. "I said yes, not because of the ring or the promise, but because I believe you're here, and you're staying." He didn't speak, just pulled her into his arms. Outside, the rain kept falling, but in their embrace, there was only warmth. That night, Serena wrote in her journal, "Today, I said yes, not because of the ring or fear of losing him. I said yes because my heart no longer trembles at his name. Maybe true love never disappears. It only waits for us to be brave enough to open the door again." She closed the journal and turned to the man sleeping beside her. Ethan's hand was wrapped around hers, his face peaceful, almost boyish in the dim light. Serena whispered, "Welcome home, Ethan." December, in Willowbrook, was cold but clear. The sea kept its steady rhythm, gentle as winter's breath. A misty light poured through the window, touching the dining table where Serena was arranging sprigs of lavender in a vase. Ethan walked out from the kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand, his hair still damp from the shower. He wore a simple white shirt and grey slacks, yet in the morning light, he looked much the same as the man she'd first met, only now, his eyes no longer carried the cold. "You're up early," he said, voice warm. "There's a lot to do," she smiled. "It's a big day." He chuckled, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I still can't believe you actually said yes. That's the 10th time you've said that, because it still feels like a dream." She tilted her head. "Then don't wake up." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "And I never will." Outside, Julian and Luke were running around the yard, waving white ribbons that Phoebe had helped them hang along the fence. "Here, Luke." "I can't reach, Julian." Ethan stepped in, lifted Luke, and helped them hang the last strand over the white gate. That same gate where he once stood begging to be allowed back into her life was now draped in lavender garlands, shimmering under the Sunday. "Daddy, will Mama look really pretty today?" Luke asked, eyes bright. "The prettiest in the world," Ethan said. "Are you gonna cry?" Julian teased. Ethan laughed. "Maybe, but don't tell her." The boys giggled and ran off, their laughter ringing through the air, the sound Serena had once only imagined in her years of solitude. Phoebe appeared, carrying a bouquet. "Where's my bride?" "Right here," Serena said. stepping into the sunlight. She wore a simple white dress, her hair loosely pinned, soft strands brushing her neck. Not extravagant, but heartbreakingly beautiful. Phoebe sighed. If Ethan doesn't get on his knees and thank heaven for you, I'll do it for him. Serena laughed through glistening eyes. The ceremony occurred by the sea, where sunlight danced on the rippling water. No grand decorations, no music but the sound of waves. Ethan stood under an arch of lavender, waiting. When Serena walked toward him, hand in hand with their two sons, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind lifted her hair, the sea shimmered behind her, and when he looked at her, his eyes filled, not from regret, but from knowing this moment was a miracle. When they finally stood face to face, he took her hands and spoke, voice trembling but sure. 5 years ago, I lost you. For 5 years I searched for you. And today, I'm done searching because I'm home. Serena met his gaze, tears glinting in the light. I used to think forever didn't exist. But if there's ever a day it begins, it must be today. Luke shouted, "Mama, Daddy's crying." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Ethan wiped his eyes, smiling. "You're right, son. Daddy's crying because he's happy." When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Ethan whispered, "I've kissed you 1,000 times in my dreams. Now I finally get to do it for real." The kiss was gentle, quiet, yet deep as the sea. The wind swept through the flowers, and the waves applauded. The reception was held in their garden, glowing under strings of warm yellow lights. Phoebe strummed her guitar, singing "You Are My Home." The boys chased each other among the lanterns, laughter echoing under the stars. Ethan squeezed Serena's hand. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think happiness had to be something grand. Turns out, it's just this sitting here with you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And 2 kids who burn the cookies." He chuckled. "And getting called Daddy every morning." Julian came running. "Family picture time." Ethan lifted Luke, Serena leaned in close, and Julian stood between them. Click. Light, laughter, and love, captured forever in a single frame. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the waves whispered outside, Serena and Ethan sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The boys were asleep inside, curled together like kittens. "Do you remember?" she said softly. "The night I left? It rained like this. I remember. I thought I'd never believe in love again. And I thought I didn't deserve it." She smiled faintly. "Turns out we were both wrong." He chuckled, his thumb brushing her hand. "I want to say something not as an apology, but as a thank you." "What's that?" "I love you." Her eyes glowed like the sea at dawn. "I know, because this time, I love you too." They sat in silence, listening to the ocean. The air smelled of lavender and cinnamon. Neighbors were still laughing nearby. After a while, Ethan whispered, "Serena, if the boys ever ask when forever started, what will you tell them?" She smiled. "I'll say forever began the day their father learned how to love and their mother learned how to forgive." He kissed her hair. "And the day we both learned how to stay." That January, Serena opened a small art gallery in town called The Lighthouse, because for her, Ethan and the boys were the light that guided her home. On the main wall hung her painting Home, the 4 of them by the sea. Below it, she wrote, "Forever doesn't mean never-ending. It means choosing each other every single day." And the narrator's voice soft as the ocean wind closed the story. "Some loves must go through loss to understand the beauty of staying. Some souls must get lost to know where home is. And some hearts, once brave enough to open again, discover that happiness has been there all along waiting." Outside, the waves rolled gently against the shore. On the porch, Ethan held Luke in his arms. Julian sat in Serena's lap, and they looked toward the horizon together. The sunset spread golden light across their faces. "Forever starts now. My begins today."